Emma, a kind-hearted young woman, is unexpectedly taken in as the ward of Adrian Lockwood, a wealthy widower she once helped in a moment of need. Her arrival at the Grand Lockwood estate ignites a fierce struggle for acceptance, as she faces hostility from Adrian's daughter-in-law, Laura, who sees Emma as a threat to her family's future. Adrian Lockwood, a wealthy widower known for his reserved demeanor, lived in a grand, isolated estate surrounded by sprawling gardens and dense woods. The mansion, once filled with the laughter and liveliness of his late wife and their son, now echoed only with silence. Adrian had spent years mourning, his heart heavy with the loneliness that wealth could not alleviate. One cold, rainy evening, a young woman named Emma found Adrian collapsed on the road near his estate. She was returning from her work at the nearby village when she saw his motionless figure. Without hesitation, Emma rushed to his aid, managing to flag down a passing vehicle that took them to the nearest hospital. Her quick actions saved Adrian's life, and despite her modest means, she refused any reward. For her, it was simply the right thing to do. Months later, still touched by Emma's kindness, Adrian decided to seek her out. He learned that she lived in a small cottage on the outskirts of the village, struggling to make ends meet. Moved by her situation and longing for companionship in his solitary life, Adrian made an unexpected proposal. He would take Emma in as his ward, ensuring she had a safe home and a proper education. Emma, initially hesitant, eventually accepted, grateful for the opportunity to better her life. The news of Emma's arrival at the Lockwood mansion spread quickly through the household, and not everyone welcomed her with open arms. Laura, Adrian's daughter-in-law, was particularly incensed. Having grown accustomed to the idea that her son Daniel would one day inherit everything, she saw Emma as an intruder, a threat to her and Daniel's future. Laura's jealousy and suspicion grew each day as she imagined Emma plotting to take over the Lockwood fortune. When Emma arrived at the estate, Laura made her feelings known. She greeted Emma with a cold smile and a thinly veiled warning. "This house is not as welcoming as it might seem. I hope you know your place here, Emma." Emma, taken aback by the hostility, kept her composure, replying softly, "I only wish to be of help and do what is expected of me, Mrs. Lockwood." But Laura was determined to make Emma's stay unbearable. Behind closed doors, she plotted with her son Daniel, who was indifferent to the situation. "We need to find a way to get rid of her, Daniel," Laura hissed one evening, "before she worms her way into your grandfather's heart and his will." Daniel, a young man of few words and even fewer ambitions, shrugged. "She's just a girl, Mother. Grandfather's pity project. She won't last long here." Laura's scowl deepened. "Don't be so sure. People like her, people with nothing, are desperate enough to do anything." Meanwhile, Emma struggled to adjust to her new life. The grandeur of the mansion, with its endless rooms and unfamiliar luxury, overwhelmed her. The staff, who took their cues from Laura, treated her with a mix of disdain and suspicion. Emma often found herself alone, wandering the estate's corridors, feeling more like a prisoner than a ward. Despite the difficulties, Emma tried to remain positive. She was determined to prove herself worthy of Adrian's trust and kindness. Every day, she studied the lessons Adrian arranged for her, eager to learn and better herself. But Laura's subtle sabotage made everything harder. Emma's belongings would mysteriously go missing. Her studies would be interrupted by menial tasks assigned by the staff at Laura's behest, and whispers of her being an opportunist reached her ears. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Emma retreated to the small room she had been given at the far end of the mansion. She sat by the window, looking out at the darkening sky, her thoughts heavy with doubt. "What am I doing here?" she whispered to herself. "I don't belong in this world. Perhaps I should leave before things get worse." But as she considered her options, there was a gentle knock on her door. It was Isabel, Adrian's granddaughter. Unlike Laura, Isabel had shown Emma kindness from the start. She was a bright, curious girl who quickly grew fond of Emma, drawn to her sincerity and warmth. "Emma," Isabel said softly, entering the room, "I brought you something." In her hands was a small, intricately carved box. "It belonged to my grandmother," Isabel explained, placing it on the table beside Emma. She always said it was meant for someone special. I think she would want you to have it." Emma's eyes welled up with tears as she opened the box to find a delicate silver locket inside. "Isabel, I don't know what to say. Just promise me you won't let them get to you," Isabel said, her voice firm despite her youth. "You belong here, Emma. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." As Isabel left, Emma clutched the locket to her chest, feeling a renewed sense of hope. She wasn't entirely alone in this house. Perhaps, with Isabel's friendship and Adrian's support, she could find a way to navigate the treacherous waters ahead. Little did she know, the challenges were only just beginning, as Laura's resentment grew stronger and her schemes more dangerous. Emma's early days at the Lockwood estate were marked by a quiet resilience. Despite the grandeur of her surroundings, she found herself isolated, the target of subtle hostilities orchestrated by Laura. The mansion, with its grand halls and luxurious rooms, began to feel like a gilded cage. The servants, influenced by Laura's disdain, treated her coldly, their eyes filled with suspicion and their words clipped and distant. Each day was a test of Emma's patience and determination. Laura, ever the manipulator, continued her campaign to undermine Emma's position in the household. She ensured that Emma was constantly reminded of her outsider status. The tasks assigned to Emma were often menial and unnecessary, thinly veiled attempts to humiliate her. Yet, Emma persisted, tackling every chore with quiet dignity, refusing to give Laura the satisfaction of seeing her break. Emma's presence at the estate, however, did not go entirely unnoticed. Daniel, Laura's son, initially shared his mother's indifference towards Emma. He saw her as nothing more than a charity case, someone who didn't belong in their world. But as the days turned into weeks, Daniel began to notice something different about Emma. Unlike the shallow socialites who frequented their home, Emma carried herself with a quiet strength and an honesty that intrigued him. One afternoon, while wandering the estate's vast gardens, Daniel encountered Emma struggling with a particularly heavy basket of garden tools. He hesitated for a moment, watching as she stubbornly attempted to carry it on her own. "You're going to hurt yourself if you keep at it like that," Daniel finally said, stepping forward. Emma looked up, surprised to see him there. "I'm fine, really," she replied, though it was clear she was struggling. "I've got it under control." Daniel shook his head and took the basket from her hands, effortlessly lifting it. "You don't have to do everything by yourself, you know." Emma, embarrassed by the situation, brushed off her hands and nodded. "Thank you," she said softly, "but I'm used to doing things on my own." As they walked back to the garden shed in silence, Daniel found himself glancing at Emma more often than he intended. There was something genuine about her, something unpretentious. Unlike many of the people he knew, Emma wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just trying to survive. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel's interactions with Emma became more frequent. He often found himself lingering in places where he knew she would be, curious about the girl who had so unexpectedly entered their lives. The more he observed, the more he admired her perseverance in the face of Laura's relentless efforts to undermine her. Emma's kindness towards Isabel, his cousin, had also not gone unnoticed. Isabel often spoke of Emma's warmth and how she made the cold mansion feel a little more like home. Meanwhile, Laura's disdain for Emma only grew. She was furious to see that Emma had not yet been driven out, and worse, that Daniel seemed to be taking an interest in her. Determined to regain control, Laura began devising more devious ways to make Emma's life miserable. She started spreading rumors among the staff, suggesting that Emma was only after Adrian's wealth, that she was manipulating him with her sob story to secure a place in his will. The rumors spread like wildfire. Servants who had been neutral or mildly curious about Emma now viewed her with outright hostility. They whispered behind her back, casting suspicious glances as she passed by. The isolation that Emma had felt upon her arrival intensified, and she found herself even more alone. One evening, as Emma sat in her small room, the weight of the day pressing heavily on her, Isabel knocked on her door. Isabel's visits had become a regular comfort for Emma, rare bright spot in the otherwise cold and unwelcoming environment. "Emma," Isabel began, her voice tinged with concern, "are you all right? You've seemed different lately." Emma forced a smile. I'm fine, Isabel. It's hard, you know? I feel like no matter what I do, it's never good enough. Isabel frowned. Is it my grandmother again? Or is it something else? Emma sighed, her shoulders slumping as she spoke. It's everyone. The servants, they look at me like I'm something they found under their shoe. I hear the things they say when they think I'm not listening. They think I'm here to take something that doesn't belong to me. Isabel's face hardened with determination. That's not true, Emma. You belong here as much as anyone else. My grandfather trusts you, and so do I. Thank you, Isabel, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. But sometimes I wonder if I'm strong enough to keep fighting. You are strong, Emma, Isabel insisted. And you're not alone. I'm here, and so is my grandfather. And, she hesitated, I think even Daniel is starting to see that you're different from what everyone says. Emma blinked in surprise. Daniel? I thought he didn't care one way or the other. Isabel smiled faintly. He's noticed, Emma. He doesn't say much, but he's been watching. I think he's starting to realize that maybe he was wrong about you. The idea that Daniel might see her differently was both comforting and confusing for Emma. She hadn't expected anyone in the family, least of all Daniel, to see her as anything other than an inconvenience. But if Isabel was right, it meant that not everyone in the Lockwood household was against her. But Laura was far from finished. She observed Daniel's growing interest in Emma with increasing alarm. The last thing she wanted was for her son to develop any sort of affection for the girl. She had worked too hard to ensure that Daniel would inherit everything, and she wasn't about to let a nobody like Emma ruin her plans. In the days that followed, Laura's sabotage became even more insidious. She arranged for Emma to be blamed for mistakes she hadn't made, setting her up for failure at every turn. Whenever something went wrong in the household, Laura ensured that the blame fell squarely on Emma's shoulders. And with each new accusation, Emma's position in the house became more precarious. One evening, after another particularly trying day, Emma found herself in the garden, seeking solace in the quiet of the night. She sat on a stone bench, staring up at the moon, her thoughts heavy with doubt. How long could she endure this? How long before she was forced to leave? Daniel, who had been walking through the garden himself, saw Emma sitting alone. He hesitated, unsure if he should approach, but something in the way she sat, shoulders hunched, drew him closer. Mind if I join you? He asked, his voice breaking the stillness. Emma looked up, surprised to see him there. Of course, she replied, shifting slightly to make room on the bench. For a while, they sat in silence, the night air cool around them. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice uncharacteristically soft. I've noticed how difficult it's been for you here. Emma sighed, her gaze fixed on the ground. It's harder than I thought it would be. I didn't expect it to be easy, but I don't know if I can do this much longer. Daniel turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. You're stronger than you think, Emma. You've already proven that by staying this long. Emma glanced at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Thank you, she said, her voice barely audible. Daniel hesitated, then continued. I know my mother has been difficult, but you shouldn't let her get to you. She's always been protective of what she thinks is hers. But you've earned your place here, Emma. Don't let anyone take that from you. His words, unexpected and genuine, touched something deep within Emma. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear that someone believed in her, especially someone like Daniel, who had every reason not to. Thank you, Daniel, she said again, her voice stronger this time. That means a lot. Daniel nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Don't mention it. As he left, Emma felt a renewed sense of determination. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she had thought. And maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to make this place feel like home. But as she stood up to return to the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. Laura would not give up easily, and Emma knew she had to be prepared for whatever came next. Days at the Lockwood estate passed slowly, the tension in the household thickening with each passing moment. Laura's hostility towards Emma was no longer a secret, but rather a quiet war waged within the mansion's walls. Emma, however, continued to persevere, her resolve hardening despite the continuous sabotage. She had little choice but to adapt, even as she became increasingly aware of the subtle shifts in her surroundings. One of the few places where Emma found solace was in the company of Isabel, Adrian's young and spirited granddaughter. Isabel, a lively girl with an inquisitive nature, had grown attached to Emma, who treated her with genuine kindness and respect. The two often spent afternoons together in the library, where Isabel would excitedly share her latest interests, from art to literature. For Emma, these moments with Isabel were a rare reprieve from the constant strain of her life at the estate. One such afternoon, Isabel and Emma sat on a cushioned window seat in the grand library, a heavy rain pattering against the glass. Isabel, curled up with a book, looked up at Emma with a curious expression. "Emma," Isabel began tentatively, "do you ever think about leaving here? I mean, with how grandmother and some of the others treat you." Emma sighed, her eyes drifting to the rain-soaked gardens outside. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but then I remember why I'm here. Your grandfather has been so kind to me, and I can't just walk away. I owe it to him to stay and prove myself." Isabel nodded, her youthful face serious. "I'm glad you're staying, Emma. I don't know what I'd do without you here." Emma smiled, touched by Isabel's words. "You don't have to worry, Isabel. I'm not going anywhere." But even as she reassured Isabel, Emma knew that staying meant facing the increasing animosity from Laura. And, recently, it seemed that Daniel had been watching her more closely, his once indifferent attitude now replaced by something more complicated. Daniel's initial curiosity about Emma had grown into a reluctant admiration. He had seen firsthand how she dealt with the challenges thrown at her, always with a quiet strength that he found surprising. The more time he spent around her, the more he began to see her not as an outsider, but as someone who genuinely cared for his family, especially Isabel and his grandfather. One evening, as the household prepared for a dinner party that Adrian was hosting for some old friends, Daniel found himself lingering in the hallway outside the dining room. From his vantage point, he could see Emma, who was helping the staff arrange the table. She moved with a calm efficiency, her focus unwavering despite the bustle around her. For a moment, Daniel's gaze lingered on Emma's face, catching a glimpse of the weariness in her eyes. It was a fleeting expression, quickly replaced by the serene composure she always tried to maintain. But it was enough to stir something in Daniel, a protective instinct he hadn't realized he possessed. "Daniel," Laura's voice, sharp and insistent, broke through his thoughts. He turned to see his mother standing a few steps away, her eyes narrowing as she noticed where his attention had been focused. "Why are you standing here like a statue?" Laura asked, her tone laced with irritation. "The guests will be arriving soon. You should be getting ready." "I was just..." Daniel trailed off, unsure of how to explain himself. He glanced back at Emma, who was now lighting the candles on the table, oblivious to their conversation. Laura's gaze followed his, her expression darkening. "Don't tell me you've been wasting your time watching her," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "I thought I made it clear that she's not to be trusted." Daniel frowned. "Mother, she's done nothing wrong. She's just trying to do her job." "Her job?" Laura scoffed. "Her job is to ingratiate herself with your grandfather, and she's doing a fine job of it. Don't be fooled, Daniel. She's not as innocent as she appears." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're wrong. Emma isn't like that." Laura's eyes flashed with anger. "You're being naive, Daniel. You think she's just a poor, sweet girl who needs our help? She's after something, and I'll be damned if I let her take it." Before Daniel could respond, the sound of the doorbell echoed through the hall, signaling the arrival of the first guests. Laura gave her son one last, scathing look before turning on her heel and heading towards the foyer to greet them. Daniel remained where he was, his thoughts a whirl of confusion and frustration. He couldn't deny that his feelings towards Emma had changed, but he also knew how determined his mother was to protect their family's interests at any cost. The dinner party went as expected, with Adrian's friends filling the grand dining room with conversation and laughter. Emma, who had been tasked with overseeing the service, moved discreetly around the room, ensuring everything ran smoothly. She was careful to stay out of Laura's way, knowing that any misstep would be met with harsh criticism. As the evening wore on, Daniel found himself increasingly distracted by Emma's presence. He watched as she interacted with the guests, her demeanor polite yet distant, never overstepping her role. Despite the challenges she faced, she carried herself with a grace that Daniel couldn't help but admire. Towards the end of the evening, Daniel caught Emma alone in the hallway as she was returning to the kitchen. "Emma," he called out, stopping her in her tracks. She turned to face him, surprise flickering across her features. "Yes, Mr. Lockwood?" "Daniel," he corrected her gently. "Please, just call me Daniel." Emma nodded, though she seemed unsure. "All right, Daniel. Is there something you need?" Daniel hesitated, searching for the right words. "I just wanted to say, I've noticed how hard you've been working. I know things haven't been easy for you here." Emma blinked, clearly not expecting such an acknowledgement. "Thank you. That means a lot, especially coming from you." He smiled slightly, his usual guarded expression softening. "You've handled everything with a lot of grace, more than most people would." Emma didn't know how to respond to that. She had been bracing herself for criticism or another reminder of her place in the household, not praise. "I'm just trying to do my best," she said finally. "And you're doing a great job," Daniel said, his voice sincere. "Don't let my mother get to you. She can be difficult, but that's no reflection on you." Emma managed a small smile. "I'll try to remember that." As Daniel turned to leave, Emma found herself calling out after him. "Daniel?" He paused, looking back at her. "Yes?" "I appreciate your kindness," Emma said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "It's not something I've had much of since I arrived here." Daniel nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "You deserve it, Emma. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As he walked away, Emma stood there for a moment, letting his words sink in. Perhaps she had been wrong to think she was entirely alone in this house. Daniel's unexpected support gave her a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could survive the challenges ahead. But for every small victory Emma felt, Laura's determination to rid the house of her grew stronger. That evening, Laura had seen the way Daniel looked at Emma, the softening of his expression, the concern in his eyes. It was unacceptable. If Daniel became too close to Emma, it could ruin everything Laura had worked for. The next morning, Laura sat in her study, her mind racing as she plotted her next move. She needed to act quickly, before Daniel's feelings for Emma could deepen any further. It was time to take more drastic measures. Later that day, as Emma was helping Isabel with her studies in the drawing room, Laura entered with a chillingly calm expression. "Emma," she said in a tone that brooked no argument, "I need to speak with you, alone." Isabel looked up, sensing the tension in her grandmother's voice. "But we're in the middle of—" "It won't take long, Isabel," Laura interrupted, her eyes never leaving Emma. "Go find something else to do." Isabel hesitated, casting a worried glance at Emma, who nodded slightly to reassure her. With a reluctant sigh, Isabel gathered her books and left the room, leaving Emma alone with Laura. Once they were alone, Laura's demeanor changed, her calm mask slipping to reveal the cold anger beneath. "I've had enough of your games, Emma." Emma stood her ground, though her heart was pounding. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mrs. Lockwood." "Don't play innocent with me," Laura snapped. "I've seen how you've wormed your way into this family, how you've manipulated my son and father-in-law. But it ends now." Emma took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. "I've done nothing but what I was brought here to do. If you have a problem with me, I suggest you speak to Mr. Lockwood." Laura's eyes narrowed. "You think you're clever, don't you? But I see through you, and I won't allow you to ruin everything." Without waiting for a response, Laura turned and left the room, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Emma stood there, the encounter leaving her shaken. She knew Laura was dangerous, but she hadn't expected such open hostility. Whatever Laura was planning, Emma sensed it would be far more serious than the small acts of sabotage she had endured so far. As she gathered her composure, Emma couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. Laura's war against her was about to escalate, and Emma feared she might not be able to withstand the storm that was coming. The tension at the Lockwood estate had reached a boiling point. The quiet undercurrents of animosity between Laura and Emma had been steadily building, and it was clear to everyone that something was about to give. Laura, who had been seething with rage after her confrontation with Emma, retreated to her study to plan her next move. This time, she was determined to rid herself of Emma once and for all. Laura's desperation led her to concoct a sinister plan. She decided to dig into Emma's past, convinced that there had to be something scandalous that could be used to discredit her. If she could find even the slightest hint of impropriety, she would use it to turn Adrian and Daniel against Emma, ensuring that she would be cast out of their lives forever. Hiring a private investigator, Laura set her scheme into motion. The investigator delved into every aspect of Emma's life before she came to the Lockwood estate, searching for anything that could be twisted into a scandal. Days passed with no word, and Laura's frustration grew, until one evening, the investigator returned with a lead. He handed Laura a folder, his expression grave. "I've found something, Mrs. Lockwood. It's not much, but it might be enough to cause some trouble." Laura's eyes gleamed as she opened the folder. Inside were a series of documents and photographs, detailing a period of Emma's life that she had never spoken of, a time when she had been associated with a family that had fallen into disgrace. The family had been involved in a financial scandal, one that had ruined them and tainted everyone connected to them. Though Emma herself had not been directly involved, her association with them was enough to cast doubt on her character. "This is perfect," Laura muttered to herself, a sinister smile spreading across her face. "This will destroy her." The next morning, Laura wasted no time in putting her plan into action. She arranged for the documents to be anonymously delivered to the Lockwood estate staff, ensuring that the rumors would spread quickly through the household. The servants, already suspicious of Emma, were quick to believe the worst. Whispers of Emma's scandalous past soon reached Adrian and Daniel, leaving both men in a state of confusion and concern. Adrian, though disturbed by the rumors, refused to take any action until he had spoken with Emma directly. He couldn't reconcile the image of the kind, selfless girl who had saved his life with the one being painted by the rumors. Daniel, on the other hand, was torn. He wanted to believe in Emma's innocence, but the weight of the accusations and his mother's insistence made him question everything he thought he knew about her. That evening, Adrian called Emma to his study. The usually warm atmosphere was tense, and Emma could sense that something was terribly wrong as she entered the room. Adrian sat behind his large oak desk, his expression unreadable. Daniel stood near the window, his back turned to them, his posture rigid. "Emma," Adrian began, his voice gentle but firm, "there's something I need to discuss with you. Some troubling information has come to light, and I need to hear the truth from you." Emma's heart sank. "What is it, Mr. Lockwood?" Adrian handed her the folder, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and concern. "This was brought to my attention today. It suggests that you were associated with a family involved in a serious financial scandal." Emma took the folder with trembling hands and opened it, her eyes scanning the contents. As she read, her face drained of color. She recognized the names and faces in the documents, people she had once known, people who had been kind to her during a difficult time in her life. But their downfall had been swift and brutal, and she had distanced herself from them long before things had spiraled out of control. "This isn't what it seems," Emma said, her voice shaking slightly as she looked up at Adrian. "I had nothing to do with the scandal. I was just a friend of the family, and when things started to go wrong, I left. I had no involvement in their business affairs." Adrian studied her face, searching for any sign of deceit. "I want to believe you, Emma. You've always been honest with me, and I've never had reason to doubt your integrity. But these are serious accusations, and they've caused quite a stir." Emma's gaze shifted to Daniel, who still hadn't turned to face her. "Daniel, do you believe this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause before Daniel finally turned around. His expression was conflicted, torn between the loyalty he felt towards his family and the trust he had begun to place in Emma. "I don't know what to think, Emma," he admitted, his voice strained. "I want to believe you, but—" Before he could finish, the door to the study burst open and Isabel rushed in, her eyes wide with panic. "Grandfather, Emma, there's something you need to see." Adrian, startled by Isabel's sudden entrance, motioned for her to continue. What is it, Isabel? Isabel thrust a piece of paper into Adrian's hands, her face pale. I found this in grandmother's room. I didn't mean to snoop, but I saw it lying there, and Adrian took the paper and quickly scanned its contents. His face darkened as he read, and he looked up at Emma, then back at the paper. This is a report from a private investigator, he said slowly, disbelief lacing his voice. Laura hired someone to dig into your past, Emma. Emma's eyes widened in shock. She what? Daniel's expression hardened as he moved to stand beside his grandfather, looking over his shoulder at the report. The realization of what his mother had done began to dawn on him, and a sense of betrayal flooded his chest. Mother did this? He asked, his voice low and filled with anger. Isabel nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She's been trying to get rid of Emma since she came here. I knew she didn't like Emma, but I didn't think she would go this far. Adrian stood up, his demeanor suddenly commanding as he addressed Emma. Emma, I believe you. I've known my daughter-in-law long enough to recognize her methods. Whatever happened in your past is of no concern to me. What matters is the person you are now, and the kindness and integrity you've shown since you came here. Emma's knees nearly gave way with relief, and she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Thank you, Mr. Lockwood. I never wanted any trouble. I just wanted to do right by you and your family. Daniel, still reeling from the discovery, looked at Emma with a newfound resolve. I'm sorry I doubted you, Emma. I should have trusted my instincts instead of letting my mother's paranoia get to me. Emma shook her head, her voice gentle. You were just trying to protect your family, Daniel. I understand. But the moment of relief was short-lived as the door opened once again and Laura entered the room, unaware of what had just transpired. She wore a satisfied smirk, fully expecting to see Emma on the verge of being dismissed. Father, Laura began in her usual cold tone. I trust you've dealt with our little problem? Adrian turned to face her, his expression stern and unforgiving. Yes, Laura, I have dealt with it. Laura's smirk faltered as she noticed the icy looks on Daniel and Isabel's faces. What's going on? She asked, her voice wavering slightly. Adrian held up the report, his eyes blazing with anger. Is this your doing, Laura? Did you really think you could ruin this girl's life with these baseless accusations? Laura's face went pale, realizing that her plan had backfired. I was just trying to protect our family, Father. I thought she was a threat. A threat? Adrian interrupted, his voice rising with indignation. The only threat I see here is your relentless scheming and your willingness to destroy anyone who stands in your way. Laura took a step back, fear and desperation written all over her face. But Father, you don't understand. No, Laura, Adrian said, cutting her off once again. You're the one who doesn't understand. Emma has shown more integrity and compassion in her time here than you have in all the years I've known you. You've let your greed and jealousy blind you to what really matters. Daniel stepped forward, his voice cold and resolute. Mother, you've gone too far. You've lied to us, manipulated us, and tried to ruin someone's life for your own selfish reasons. I can't stand by you in this. Laura's eyes filled with tears as she looked at her son, realizing the depth of his anger and disappointment. Daniel, please. I was only thinking of you, of our future. But Daniel shook his head. This isn't the future I want, Mother. I won't be a part of your schemes anymore. With that, Daniel turned away from Laura, his mind made up. He walked over to Emma and took her hand, a silent gesture of support and solidarity. Emma looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and relief. In that moment, she knew she wasn't alone. Isabel, emboldened by her brother's actions, stepped forward as well. Emma belongs here, grandmother. She's part of this family, whether you like it or not. Adrian, his anger subsiding into a weary sadness, looked at Laura with a deep sense of regret. You've betrayed our trust, Laura. I can't overlook this. I think it's best if you leave the estate for a while, to reflect on what you've done. Laura, defeated and humiliated, could do nothing but nod. She had lost everything. Her son's respect, her place in the household, and the control she had fought so hard to maintain. Without another word, she turned and left the study, her footsteps echoing down the hall as she retreated to her room to pack her things. As the door closed behind Laura, a heavy silence fell over the room. Emma, still holding Daniel's hand, looked at Adrian with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "Mr. Lockwood, I don't know what to say." Adrian walked over to Emma, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to say anything, Emma. You've been through enough. Just know that you are welcome here, and that you have my full support." Daniel squeezed Emma's hand, his expression warm and sincere. "We'll get through this, Emma. Together." Isabel, her eyes bright with admiration, nodded in agreement. "You're part of our family now, Emma. Don't ever forget that." For the first time since she arrived at the Lockwood estate, Emma felt a true sense of belonging. The battle had been hard-fought, and there were still challenges ahead, but she knew that she wasn't alone. With Adrian, Daniel, and Isabel by her side, she could face whatever came next. But even as they stood together, united in their determination to move forward, a shadow of doubt lingered in the back of Emma's mind. Laura had been defeated, but Emma knew that her departure was not the end of the story. The road ahead was uncertain, and the scars of the past would take time to heal. The days following Laura's departure were marked by a tense quiet that hung over the Lockwood estate. The household staff, who had been so quick to judge Emma, now avoided her eyes, their previous disdain replaced by an uneasy guilt. Emma, however, carried on with her usual quiet grace, determined not to let the recent turmoil shake her resolve. Adrian, true to his word, extended his full support to Emma, ensuring that she felt secure in her place at the estate. He made it clear to everyone in the household that Emma was to be treated with the respect she deserved. Yet, despite his efforts, a lingering unease remained. Emma couldn't help but wonder if she truly belonged in this world of wealth and power, or if she would forever be seen as an outsider. Daniel, on the other hand, had become a constant source of comfort and strength for Emma. Their relationship, once distant and indifferent, had blossomed into something deeper, something neither of them had expected. They spent more time together, their conversations filled with a newfound understanding and mutual respect. Daniel's feelings for Emma had grown beyond mere admiration. He found himself drawn to her in a way that was impossible to ignore. One crisp autumn afternoon, Daniel found Emma sitting alone in the garden, her face tilted towards the sun as she enjoyed a rare moment of peace. He approached quietly, not wanting to disturb her, but she sensed his presence and smiled up at him. "Enjoying the sunshine?" Daniel asked, taking a seat beside her on the stone bench. Emma nodded, her expression serene. "It's nice to have a moment to just breathe." Daniel watched her for a moment, his gaze softening. "You've been through a lot, Emma. I don't think I've ever told you how much I admire your strength." Emma looked down, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I don't know if I'm as strong as you think, Daniel. There were times when I wanted to leave, to give up. But you didn't," Daniel said firmly. "You stayed. You fought through it all, and you've earned your place here." Emma met his eyes, searching for any hint of doubt, but all she saw was sincerity. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know what I would have done without your support." Daniel reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You're not alone, Emma. You never were, even if it felt that way." For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the only sounds the rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant chirping of birds. But the quiet was filled with an unspoken understanding, a connection that had deepened over the course of their shared trials. As the days turned into weeks, the Lockwood estate slowly began to return to a semblance of normalcy. Laura's absence, though noticeable, seemed to lift a weight off the household. The staff, realizing the error of their ways, made efforts to mend their relationship with Emma. It was a slow process, but over time, the tensions eased and Emma began to feel more at home. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Adrian announced that he had something important to discuss. The mood was light, the dining room filled with the warm glow of candlelight, and everyone looked up with interest. "I've been giving this a lot of thought," Adrian began, his voice steady, "and I've decided that it's time to make some changes around here. I've already spoken with my lawyer, and I want you all to know that I'm revising my will." Daniel and Isabel exchanged curious glances, while Emma looked down at her plate, unsure of what this meant for her. "Emma," Adrian continued, his tone softening as he turned his attention to her. "You've become an important part of this family. You've shown more integrity and compassion than anyone could have asked for, and I want to ensure that you're taken care of, no matter what happens in the future." Emma's eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Lockwood, I don't know what to say." Adrian smiled warmly. "There's no need to say anything, Emma. This is simply a gesture of my gratitude. You'll have a secure place here, for as long as you wish to stay." Daniel, who had been listening intently, couldn't help but feel a swell of pride and relief. His grandfather's decision was more than just a matter of security for Emma. It was a formal acknowledgement of her place in their lives. "But that's not all," Adrian continued, his gaze shifting to Daniel. "I've also decided that it's time for you, Daniel, to take on more responsibility within the family business. It's time for you to start preparing to lead this family." Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of his grandfather's words. "I understand, grandfather. I won't let you down." Adrian's expression softened further as he looked between Daniel and Emma. "I see a lot of potential in both of you, and I believe that together you can achieve great things." The implications of Adrian's words were clear to everyone at the table, but it was Isabel who spoke up first, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Does this mean we're going to have more family dinners with Emma here?" Emma blushed, but Adrian chuckled, his mood lightened by Isabel's playful remark. "I certainly hope so." The dinner continued with a renewed sense of hope and unity. For the first time in what felt like forever, the Lockwood family seemed to be moving forward, leaving behind the shadows of the past. However, the peace that had settled over the estate was disrupted one final time when a letter arrived from Laura. Addressed to Adrian, the letter was a mix of apology and bitterness. She expressed regret for her actions, but also insisted that she had only been trying to protect her family. Laura's words were tinged with anger at being cast out, but there was also a plea for reconciliation, a request to return to the estate and mend the rift she had caused. Adrian read the letter aloud to Daniel and Emma, his expression unreadable as he finished. "What do you think, Daniel? Should we allow her to come back?" Daniel, who had struggled with his feelings towards his mother since the truth of her scheming had come to light, took a deep breath before answering. I think she needs time, grandfather. Time to really understand what she's done. Maybe one day we can forgive her, but for now, it might be best if she stays away." Adrian nodded, seemingly in agreement. "You're right, Daniel. I'll write her back and let her know that she needs to take more time to reflect." Emma, who had remained silent during the discussion, felt a mix of emotions. She had never wished harm on Laura, despite everything that had happened, but she also knew that it would take time to heal the wounds that had been inflicted. As the days passed, Laura's absence became a footnote in the story of the Lockwood family. Life at the estate settled into a new rhythm, one that included Emma not just as a ward, but as a valued member of the family. Daniel and Emma's relationship continued to grow, evolving from friendship into something more profound. Daniel admired Emma's strength and kindness, and Emma found in Daniel a partner who respected and cherished her for who she was, not for what she could offer. One evening, as they walked through the estate's gardens, Daniel stopped suddenly and turned to Emma, his expression serious yet full of warmth. "Emma, there's something I've been wanting to say for a while now," he began, taking her hands in his. "You've changed my life in ways I never expected. You've brought light into this house, into my life, and I can't imagine a future without you." Emma's heart raced as she looked into Daniel's eyes, the sincerity of his words leaving her breathless. "I love you, Emma," Daniel said softly, his voice steady. "And I want us to build a life together, here, in this place that's become your home as much as it is mine." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes as she realized the depth of Daniel's feelings. "I love you too, Daniel," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "More than I ever thought possible." Daniel smiled, a look of pure happiness on his face. "Then let's make it official." As the two embraced, the future stretched out before them, filled with hope and promise. The trials they had faced had only strengthened their bond, and they knew that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The Lockwood estate, once a place of secrets and strife, had transformed into a home filled with love and unity. Adrian, seeing the happiness that Emma and Daniel had found, felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for years. Isabel, ever the optimist, looked forward to the days when the house would be filled with even more laughter and joy. And as for Emma, she had finally found the family she had always longed for, not one bound by blood, but by the deeper ties of love, respect, and shared experiences. She knew that the road to happiness had not been easy, but standing beside Daniel, she realized that every hardship had been worth it. As the sun set over the estate, casting a golden glow over the gardens, Emma felt a profound sense of contentment. The past was behind her, and the future, filled with possibilities, was just beginning. And in that moment, she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be.